The desert sun blazed mercilessly over Camp Leatherneck in Afghanistan, as Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez watched the incoming transport helicopter kick up clouds of sand and dust. He squinted against the swirling debris, adjusting his desert camouflage uniform while waiting for the new arrivals. The base had been expecting reinforcements for weeks, and morale among the Marines was running low after several difficult missions. As the helicopter's rotors gradually slowed, Rodriguez could make out several figures emerging from the aircraft. Most were the typical Marines he'd expected, young men with fresh faces and nervous energy. But one figure caught his attention immediately. A woman stepped down from the helicopter with a confidence that seemed to radiate from every movement. She was of medium height with dark hair pulled back in regulation style, but there was something about her presence that made even the seasoned Marines nearby take notice. Rodriguez had been stationed at this forward operating base for 8 months already. He'd seen plenty of Marines come and go, but something about this newcomer struck him as different. She moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years perfecting her craft, yet there was an alertness in her eyes that suggested she was constantly assessing her surroundings. The woman approached the group of waiting Marines. Her gear bag slung effortlessly over one shoulder. She stopped in front of Rodriguez and extended her hand with a firm grip that surprised him with its strength. "Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell reporting for duty," she said, her voice clear and steady, despite the chaos of the helicopter departure behind her. Rodriguez found himself momentarily taken aback by her direct gaze. Most new arrivals, especially those coming to their first combat deployment, showed at least some nervousness. Mitchell, however, seemed completely at ease, as if she were simply reporting for another day at the office back home. "Welcome to paradise," Rodriguez replied with the dry humor that had become second nature among the deployed Marines. "Hope you're ready for the real deal out here." Mitchell's lips curved into a slight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I didn't come here for the vacation, Sergeant." As they walked toward the main compound, Rodriguez couldn't help but notice how Mitchell moved. She wasn't just walking. She was scanning, observing, taking in every detail of her new environment. Her eyes moved constantly but subtly, cataloging potential threats and escape routes in a way that spoke of extensive training. The other Marines in Rodriguez's unit had gathered near the command tent, curious about the new arrivals. Word had already spread that they were getting their first female Marine assigned to their forward reconnaissance unit, and the reactions were mixed. Some of the younger Marines whispered among themselves, while the more experienced ones maintained their professional demeanor. Corporal Jake Thompson, a loudmouthed Marine from Texas who never missed an opportunity to voice his opinions, was the first to speak up as Mitchell approached. "So what's your story, Marine?" Thompson asked, his tone carrying just enough challenge to make the question feel like a test. "You ever been in country before, or is this your first rodeo?" Mitchell stopped and turned to face Thompson directly. For a moment, the entire group fell silent, sensing the tension in the air. "This is my third deployment," she replied calmly. "Second in Afghanistan, first in Iraq." Thompson's eyebrows raised slightly, but he wasn't ready to back down. "3 deployments, huh? What's your MOS?" "Scout sniper," Mitchell answered without hesitation. The silence that followed was even more pronounced. Scout snipers were among the most elite Marines, requiring extensive training and exceptional skill. The fact that Mitchell had achieved this designation as a woman made it even more remarkable, given the recent changes in military policy that had only recently opened combat roles to female Marines. Rodriguez felt a mix of respect and curiosity building within him. He'd worked with plenty of skilled Marines over the years, but scout snipers were a breed apart. They required not just exceptional marksmanship skills, but also patience, intelligence, and the ability to remain completely motionless for hours at a time while gathering intelligence on enemy movements. "Well, I'll be damned," muttered Sergeant First Class Williams, a grizzled veteran who had been surprisingly quiet during the exchange. "Guess we're getting some real talent in this unit." Mitchell acknowledged the comment with a slight nod but didn't elaborate further. She seemed content to let her credentials speak for themselves rather than boasting about her accomplishments. As the group began to disperse, Rodriguez found himself walking alongside Mitchell toward the quarters where she would be staying. "So, 3 deployments," he said, genuinely curious. "That's pretty impressive for someone your age. How long you been in?" 6 years, Mitchell replied. "Enlisted straight out of high school." Rodriguez did some quick mental math. If Mitchell had enlisted at 18 and had been in for 6 years, that made her 24. To have completed scout sniper training and 3 deployments by that age was genuinely impressive. "What made you want to be a sniper?" he asked. Mitchell was quiet for a moment, as if considering how much to reveal. "I've always been good at staying still and watching," she finally said. Turns out the Corps had a use for that. There was something in her tone that suggested there was more to the story, but Rodriguez didn't push. Everyone had their reasons for choosing their path in the military, and most of those reasons were personal. As they reached the temporary quarters, Mitchell turned to face Rodriguez. "I appreciate the welcome, Sergeant. I'm looking forward to working with your unit." Rodriguez nodded, but as he watched her walk away, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was much more to Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell than met the eye. Something about her calm confidence and the way she carried herself suggested that she had already seen and done things that most Marines twice her age had never experienced. Little did he know that within a matter of days, Mitchell would earn a call sign that would become legendary among the Marines at Camp Leatherneck, and that his own assumptions about what she was capable of would be completely shattered. The next morning came early at Camp Leatherneck, as it always did. Rodriguez was making his rounds through the compound when he spotted Mitchell at the shooting range, even though official training wasn't scheduled to begin for another 2 hours. She was alone, methodically cleaning her rifle with the kind of attention to detail that spoke of years of discipline. Rodriguez approached quietly, not wanting to disturb her concentration. Mitchell's weapon was a M40A5 sniper rifle, the standard issue for Marine Scout snipers. But even from a distance, Rodriguez could see that this particular rifle had been customized and maintained with extraordinary care. Every surface gleamed, and the scope had been adjusted with precision that suggested countless hours of practice. "You're up early," Rodriguez observed as he drew closer. Mitchell looked up from her work, unsurprised by his presence. "Old habits," she replied simply. "I like to know my equipment inside and out before I trust my life to it." Rodriguez watched as she reassembled the rifle with movements so fluid they seemed almost automatic. Her hands moved with the confidence of someone who could perform the task blindfolded, which, given her training, she probably could. "Mind if I ask how you got into sniping?" Rodriguez said, settling onto a nearby bench. "It's not exactly the most common choice, especially for someone who enlisted so young." Mitchell's hands paused for just a moment before continuing their work. "My father was a hunter," she said. "Taught me to shoot when I was 8 years old. By the time I was 12, I could hit a target at 300 yards. That's impressive shooting for a kid." "He used to say that hunting wasn't about killing," Mitchell continued, her voice taking on a distant quality. "It was about patience, observation, and understanding your environment. You had to become part of the landscape, invisible until the moment you chose to act." Rodriguez found himself studying Mitchell's profile as she spoke. There was something almost meditative about the way she handled her weapon, as if the ritual of cleaning and maintaining it served as more than just practical preparation. "So you grew up hunting?" "Every weekend," Mitchell confirmed. "Dad would take me out to the woods and we'd spend hours just watching. He taught me to identify different animal tracks, to read wind patterns, to move without making a sound. Said the best hunters were the ones who could disappear completely." As she spoke, Rodriguez began to understand why Mitchell carried herself with such quiet confidence. The skills that made someone an effective hunter translated almost perfectly to military sniping. Patience, observation, the ability to remain motionless for extended periods, and most importantly, the mental discipline to wait for the perfect moment to act. "What did your family think when you enlisted?" Rodriguez asked. Mitchell's expression hardened slightly. "My father died in a car accident when I was 17, she said quietly. Mom wasn't thrilled about me joining the military, but she understood that I needed to find my own way." The revelation explained a lot about Mitchell's demeanor. She had the bearing of someone who had been forced to grow up quickly, to take responsibility for herself at an age when most people were still figuring out their place in the world. "I'm sorry," Rodriguez said, meaning it. Mitchell shrugged, but Rodriguez could see that the loss still affected her. "He taught me everything I needed to know," she said. "The Corps just gave me a way to use it." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Corporal Thompson and several other Marines who had come to the range for morning weapons training. Thompson's expression soured slightly when he saw Mitchell, but he maintained his professional demeanor. "Morning, Staff Sergeant," Thompson said with exaggerated formality. Getting some extra practice in? Just familiarizing myself with the range, Mitchell replied evenly. Thompson gestured toward her rifle. That's some fancy hardware. You actually know how to use that thing, or is it just for show? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Rodriguez felt the tension immediately and was about to intervene when Mitchell stood up, her rifle now fully assembled. Would you like a demonstration? She asked calmly. Thompson's grin widened. Sure, why not? Let's see what you've got. Mitchell walked to the firing line and assumed a prone position with movements so smooth they seemed choreographed. She adjusted her scope with tiny, precise movements, then settled into absolute stillness. For several long moments, she simply lay there, breathing steadily, becoming one with her weapon. The target she had chosen was at the far end of the range, 800 yards away. Most Marines would consider it a challenging shot even under ideal conditions. But Mitchell seemed completely relaxed, as if the distance meant nothing to her. Rodriguez found himself holding his breath as Mitchell made final adjustments to her position. There was something almost supernatural about the way she seemed to meld with her rifle, becoming a single unified weapon system. The shot, when it came, was so sudden that several of the watching Marines jumped. The report echoed across the desert and all eyes turned to the distant target. Through his binoculars, Rodriguez could see a neat hole exactly in the center of the target's bullseye. The shot had been perfect, not just accurate, but surgically precise. Thompson's cocky grin had completely disappeared. He lowered his own binoculars with a stunned expression, clearly not having expected such a demonstration of skill. Lucky shot, he muttered, but his heart wasn't in the challenge anymore. Mitchell rose from her position with the same fluid grace she had shown when assuming it. She looked directly at Thompson, her expression neutral but her message clear. I don't believe in luck, she said quietly. The other Marines exchanged glances, clearly impressed despite themselves. Rodriguez felt a surge of respect for Mitchell's professionalism. She had made her point without boasting or humiliating Thompson, simply demonstrating her competence and letting the results speak for themselves. As the group dispersed, Rodriguez approached Mitchell again. That was some shooting, he said admiringly. Mitchell was already breaking down her rifle for cleaning. It was a controlled environment, she replied modestly. Real-world conditions are always more challenging. Rodriguez had the distinct feeling that Mitchell's idea of challenging and his own were very different things. But as he watched her methodically clean her weapon once again, he began to suspect that Camp Leatherneck was about to become a very different place with Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell around. 3 days later, the call came that would change everything. Rodriguez was in the command tent reviewing intelligence reports when Lieutenant Colonel Hayes burst through the entrance, his face grim with urgency. We've got a situation, Hayes announced to the assembled Marines. Intelligence has identified a high-value target in the Helmand province. Taliban commander who's been coordinating attacks on our supply convoys for the past 2 months. Rodriguez straightened in his chair, immediately understanding the significance. The convoy attacks had been devastating to their operations, costing lives and critical supplies. Finding and eliminating the commander responsible had been a top priority for weeks. The target is holed up in a compound approximately 12 miles northeast of here, Hayes continued, pointing to a map spread across the table. The area is heavily defended and our usual approach routes are compromised. We need to take him out before he relocates again. Mitchell, who had been quietly observing from the back of the tent, stepped forward. What's the timeline, sir? Hayes looked at her with surprise as if he had forgotten she was there. We have a narrow window. Intelligence suggests he'll be moving at dawn the day after tomorrow. That gives us roughly 36 hours to plan and execute. What about air support? Asked Sergeant Williams. Negative, Hayes replied. Weather's moving in and we can't guarantee air coverage. This needs to be a ground operation. Rodriguez studied the map, immediately seeing the problems they faced. The target's location was in mountainous terrain, with limited approach routes. Any conventional assault would result in heavy casualties, assuming they could even reach the compound without being detected. Sir, Mitchell said quietly, may I suggest an alternative approach? All eyes turned to her. Hayes raised an eyebrow but nodded for her to continue. Mitchell stepped to the map and pointed to a ridgeline approximately 1,000 meters from the target compound. Single sniper position here, she said, tracing a path with her finger. One shot, clean elimination, minimal risk to our personnel. Thompson, who had been unusually quiet since the shooting range incident, shook his head. That's over 1,000 meters in mountain terrain. Wind conditions alone would make that shot nearly impossible. Mitchell looked at him calmly. Nearly impossible isn't the same as impossible. Hayes studied the map more carefully, clearly intrigued by Mitchell's proposal. What would you need? 2-person team, Mitchell replied without hesitation. Myself and a spotter. We infiltrate during darkness, establish position before dawn, take the shot when the target presents himself, then extract immediately. Rodriguez found himself both impressed and concerned by Mitchell's confidence. The shot she was proposing would be extraordinarily difficult under the best circumstances. In enemy territory, with limited support and extraction options, it bordered on suicidal. The extraction would be the biggest challenge, Rodriguez pointed out. Once you take that shot, every hostile in the area is going to know your approximate position. Which is why we plan multiple extraction routes, Mitchell responded. Hit fast, move fast, stay ahead of their response. Hayes was quiet for several long moments, clearly weighing the options. A conventional assault would require significant personnel and resources, with no guarantee of success. Mitchell's plan was high risk, but it offered the possibility of completing the mission with minimal exposure. What about backup? Hayes asked finally. Quick reaction force standing by at a designated rally point, Mitchell suggested. Close enough to provide support if needed, far enough away to avoid detection during the initial approach. Rodriguez could see Hayes making his decision. The colonel had earned his reputation by taking calculated risks when the potential payoff justified them. This situation definitely qualified. All right, Hayes said finally. Mitchell, you've got the mission. Choose your spotter and submit a detailed plan by 1800 hours. As the briefing dispersed, Rodriguez found himself walking alongside Mitchell toward the exit. You realize what you just volunteered for, right? He asked. Mitchell nodded. A chance to end a major threat to our operations with minimal risk to our personnel. Minimal risk? Rodriguez couldn't hide his skepticism. You're talking about a shot that would challenge the best snipers in the world in hostile territory, with limited support. Mitchell stopped walking and turned to face him. For the first time since her arrival, Rodriguez saw something in her eyes that went beyond professional confidence. There was a cold determination there, something that suggested she took this mission very personally. Those convoy attacks killed 8 Marines last month, she said quietly. Good Marines with families waiting for them back home. If I can prevent more deaths by taking one shot, then it's worth the risk. Rodriguez found himself studying Mitchell's face, trying to understand what drove her. He had served with plenty of brave Marines over the years, but there was something different about Mitchell's motivation. It wasn't just duty or patriotism, it was something deeper, more personal. You need a spotter, he heard himself saying. I volunteer. Mitchell looked surprised. You don't have to do that, Sergeant. Maybe not, Rodriguez replied, but I'm not letting you go out there alone. Besides, you'll need someone who knows the terrain. A slight smile crossed Mitchell's face, the first genuine smile Rodriguez had seen from her since her arrival. Thank you, she said simply. As they walked back toward the barracks, Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that he had just committed himself to something far more dangerous than a simple reconnaissance mission. But watching Mitchell's calm determination, he also couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to witness something extraordinary. The next 24 hours would be spent in intensive planning and preparation. Weather reports, terrain analysis, equipment checks, and contingency planning would consume every moment, but Rodriguez already knew that the success or failure of the mission would ultimately come down to a single moment, a single shot, and the remarkable woman who would be taking it. What Rodriguez didn't know was that within hours, Mitchell would demonstrate skills that would earn her a call sign that would become legendary throughout the Corps, and that his own understanding of what was possible would be forever changed. The infiltration began at 200 hours under a moonless sky that provided perfect cover for their movement. Rodriguez and Mitchell moved through the rocky terrain like shadows, their faces painted with camouflage and their gear configured for absolute silence. Every piece of equipment had been secured to prevent noise, and their movements followed patterns that had been rehearsed dozens of times during the previous day's preparation. Rodriguez had spent years moving through hostile territory, but he found himself constantly impressed by Mitchell's movement techniques. She seemed to flow across the landscape like water, finding paths that avoided loose rocks and unstable ground almost instinctively. Her footsteps were so quiet that Rodriguez had to occasionally check to make sure she was still behind him. The route they had chosen took them through a winding valley that provided cover from observation, but added significant distance to their approach. Mitchell had insisted on the longer route, arguing that stealth was more important than speed. As they moved deeper into enemy territory, Rodriguez began to understand her reasoning. Contact. 2 o'clock. Mitchell whispered so quietly that Rodriguez almost missed it. He froze immediately, scanning the terrain in the direction she had indicated. After several moments, he spotted them. 2 Taliban fighters moving along a ridgeline approximately 400 meters away. They were clearly on patrol, but their movement was casual, suggesting they weren't aware of any intrusion. Mitchell and Rodriguez remained motionless for nearly 10 minutes, waiting for the patrol to move out of their area. During the entire time, Mitchell never shifted position or showed any sign of impatience. She simply became part of the landscape, invisible and patient. When the patrol finally disappeared over the ridge, they resumed their movement. Rodriguez found himself marveling at Mitchell's discipline. Many Marines, especially younger ones, would have been eager to continue moving as soon as the immediate threat passed. Mitchell, however, waited until she was absolutely certain the area was clear. "How did you spot them so quickly?" Rodriguez whispered as they continued their approach. "Movement against the skyline," Mitchell replied softly. Their silhouettes broke the natural pattern of the ridge. Rodriguez looked back toward where the patrol had been and realized he never would have noticed such a subtle detail. Mitchell's ability to read the terrain and spot threats was extraordinary, even by special operations standards. They reached their planned position just as the first hints of dawn began to appear on the eastern horizon. The location Mitchell had chosen provided perfect fields of fire toward the target compound, while offering multiple escape routes through the rocky terrain behind them. More importantly, their position was naturally camouflaged by large boulders and scrub vegetation. Mitchell immediately began establishing her shooting position with the methodical precision Rodriguez had come to expect from her. She arranged several small rocks to create a stable platform for her rifle, then spent nearly 20 minutes adjusting her position until she achieved perfect sight alignment with the target area. Through his spotting scope, Rodriguez could see the compound clearly. It was a typical Afghan structure, mud brick walls surrounding a central courtyard with several buildings. Intelligence had indicated that their target typically emerged from the main building around sunrise for morning prayers, providing a brief window of opportunity. "Range to target?" Mitchell asked quietly. Rodriguez made careful calculations using his rangefinder and the known dimensions of the compound. 1,047 meters, he reported. Mitchell made tiny adjustments to her scope, compensating for the distance, elevation, and current wind conditions. Rodriguez watched her work with growing admiration for her technical expertise. Every movement was deliberate and precise, showing years of training and experience. "Wind speed and direction?" she asked. Rodriguez studied the indicators he had placed around their position during setup. Variable between 3 and 5 miles per hour, predominantly from the southwest. Mitchell nodded and made additional scope adjustments. The complexity of the shot was staggering. The distance alone would challenge even expert marksmen. But the mountain terrain created unpredictable wind patterns that could affect bullet trajectory in countless ways. "Time to target area?" Mitchell inquired. Rodriguez checked his watch. Approximately 15 minutes based on intelligence estimates. For the next quarter hour, they maintained absolute silence and stillness. Rodriguez found himself amazed by Mitchell's ability to remain motionless for extended periods. She seemed to enter an almost meditative state, becoming one with her weapon and the surrounding environment. At exactly 06:27 hours, Rodriguez spotted movement in the compound's courtyard. "Target area active," he whispered. Through his scope, Rodriguez could see several figures emerging from the main building. The image quality was excellent, allowing him to make out details of their clothing and equipment, but identifying their specific target among the group would require careful observation. "Second figure from the left," Rodriguez reported after studying the group carefully. "Dark beard, white head wrap, carrying what appears to be a radio." Mitchell tracked her rifle slightly, acquiring the target through her scope. Rodriguez could see her breathing slow and deepen as she prepared for the shot. Everything about her posture suggested complete focus and control. Confirmed, Mitchell whispered. I have the target. The group in the courtyard began to disperse, with their target moving toward what appeared to be a prayer area near the compound's eastern wall. The movement would provide only a brief window of opportunity before other buildings blocked the line of sight. Target is moving to prayer position, Rodriguez observed. Window closing in approximately 90 seconds. Mitchell's breathing became even more controlled, each breath deliberate and measured. Rodriguez could sense her entering the final phase of preparation, where everything except the target and the shot faded away. Wind holding steady, Rodriguez reported. Clear shot when ready. Mitchell's finger moved to the trigger, but she didn't rush. She waited, patient as a hunting cat for the perfect moment when all variables aligned. The target had settled into his prayer position, presenting a stable sight picture. Rodriguez held his breath, knowing that the next few seconds would determine the success or failure of their mission. Everything they had trained for, everything they had risked, came down to this single moment. Time seemed to stop as Mitchell settled into her final shooting position. Rodriguez could feel the tension in the air, that electric moment before action when everything hangs in perfect balance. Through his spotting scope, he watched their target complete his ritual preparations and assume a stationary position for morning prayers. Target stable, Rodriguez whispered, barely breathing the words. Wind steady at 4 miles per hour southwest. Mitchell's response was so quiet he almost missed it. Copy. Rodriguez had observed many snipers take difficult shots during his military career, but he had never seen anyone achieve the level of stillness that Mitchell demonstrated in that moment. She seemed to have become part of the mountain itself, her breathing so controlled it was barely visible, her body perfectly aligned with her weapon. The shot, when it came, was a surprise despite Rodriguez's expectation. The rifle's report echoed across the valley like thunder, immediately followed by the distinctive crack of a bullet breaking the sound barrier. Through his scope, Rodriguez saw the target collapse instantly, confirming a successful hit. Target down, Rodriguez reported automatically, but his attention was already shifting to their extraction. Time to move, but Mitchell wasn't moving. Instead, she remained in position, her eye still pressed to her scope, scanning the compound. Rodriguez was about to urge her to begin their withdrawal when he saw why she was waiting. Additional targets, Mitchell said calmly. 3 hostiles moving to defensive positions. Rodriguez swung his spotting scope back to the compound and immediately saw the problem. The sound of the shot had alerted other Taliban fighters in the area, and they were quickly establishing defensive positions around the compound. Worse, several of them appeared to be scanning the surrounding hills, trying to locate the source of the shot. We need to extract now, Rodriguez urged, before they organize a search. Negative, Mitchell replied, her voice carrying an authority that stopped Rodriguez's protest. They're setting up a heavy machine gun position that will dominate our primary extraction route. Rodriguez looked through his scope again and saw that Mitchell was right. Taliban fighters were manhandling a large weapon toward a position that would give them commanding fields of fire over the valley they needed to cross during their withdrawal. What are you thinking? Rodriguez asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. I can neutralize the machine gun crew, Mitchell said, already making sight adjustments. Clean shot, approximately the same range. Rodriguez felt his stomach tighten. Taking a second shot would significantly increase their risk of detection and pursuit. Every additional moment they remained in position made their extraction more dangerous. Mitchell, we accomplished the mission, Rodriguez said urgently. Let's get out of here while we can. That machine gun will cut down our extraction team if they come in to support us, Mitchell replied, her eye never leaving her scope. I won't let that happen. Rodriguez understood her reasoning, but the tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Already he could see Taliban fighters spreading out from the compound, beginning what would undoubtedly become an organized search for their position. Target acquired, Mitchell announced. Machine gunner, center of weapon position. Rodriguez realized that arguing with Mitchell at this point would be counterproductive. Her mind was made up and her reasoning was sound, even if the risk was significant. He focused on providing the best possible support for her shot. Range unchanged, Rodriguez reported. Wind picking up slightly, now 5 to 6 miles per hour. Mitchell made minute adjustments to her scope, compensating for the changing conditions. Rodriguez could see that the second shot would be even more challenging than the first. The machine gunner was partially concealed behind cover, presenting a much smaller target. "Shot when ready," Rodriguez said, resigned to their course of action. Mitchell's breathing pattern shifted again, entering that same meditative state Rodriguez had observed before. But this time there was an added element of urgency. They both knew that taking too long would allow the Taliban to get organized and potentially locate their position. The second shot came less than 30 seconds after the first. Rodriguez watched through his scope as the machine gunner collapsed, the heavy weapon falling silent before it could be brought into action. "Target down," Rodriguez confirmed. "Now we really need to move." Mitchell was already breaking down her position, securing her rifle and preparing for rapid movement. But as she stood, Rodriguez noticed something that made his blood run cold, the sound of vehicles approaching from the direction of the compound. "We've got company," Rodriguez announced, pointing toward a dust cloud rising from a road that led to their general area. Mitchell followed his gaze and immediately assessed the situation. The vehicles would reach the base of their hill within minutes, and once Taliban fighters began climbing toward their position, escape would become much more difficult. "This way," Mitchell said, pointing toward a route that led deeper into the mountains rather than back toward their planned extraction point. "That's not our route," Rodriguez protested. "Our planned route is compromised," Mitchell replied, already moving. "We need to get to alternate extraction point Charlie." Rodriguez knew she was right, but alternate extraction point Charlie was over 3 miles away through extremely difficult terrain. They would need to cover that distance while being pursued by hostile forces who knew the area better than they did. As they began their movement, Rodriguez couldn't help but marvel at Mitchell's tactical awareness. Even in the stress of the moment, she had maintained enough situational awareness to recognize when their original plan needed to change. "How do you do it?" Rodriguez asked as they moved rapidly across the rocky terrain. "Do what?" Mitchell replied, her attention focused on navigation and threat detection. "Stay so calm under pressure. Make decisions that fast." Mitchell was quiet for several moments as they continued their movement. Finally, she answered without looking back. "When I was learning to hunt with my father, he taught me that panic is the enemy of precision. He said that the moment you let fear control your actions, you've already lost." Rodriguez found himself understanding Mitchell better with each passing moment. The same qualities that had made her an exceptional hunter had translated perfectly to military operations. She didn't just possess technical skills, she had the mental discipline to use those skills effectively under the most challenging circumstances. Behind them, Rodriguez could hear the sound of pursuit beginning as Taliban fighters reached the area where they had taken their shots. But ahead of them lay miles of difficult terrain and the challenge of reaching safety while being hunted by forces that outnumbered them significantly. What Rodriguez didn't know was that Mitchell's performance during their extraction would be even more impressive than her shooting, and that by the time they reached safety, she would have earned a reputation that would follow her for the rest of her military career. The pursuit began in earnest 20 minutes after their second shot. Rodriguez could hear voices echoing across the valley below them as Taliban fighters spread out in search patterns, working their way systematically up the mountainside. The sound of their pursuit was both distant and urgent, creating a constant reminder that capture meant certain death. Mitchell led their movement with the same methodical precision she had shown during the shooting phase of their mission. She chose routes that provided maximum concealment while maintaining reasonable speed, constantly balancing the need for stealth against the necessity of staying ahead of their pursuers. "How many do you estimate?" Mitchell asked as they paused behind a large boulder to assess their situation. Rodriguez carefully observed the search patterns below them through his binoculars. "At least 20, possibly more. They're being systematic about it, checking every possible hiding spot." Mitchell studied the terrain ahead of them, plotting their next movement. The landscape was treacherous. Loose rocks that could start avalanches, narrow ledges with deadly drops, and limited vegetation for concealment. But Rodriguez was beginning to understand that Mitchell saw opportunities where others saw only obstacles. "See that ridgeline?" Mitchell pointed to a rocky outcropping about half a mile ahead. "If we can reach that position, we'll have visual contact with extraction point Charlie." Rodriguez studied the route she was suggesting and immediately saw the problem. "That's completely exposed for the last 200 meters. If they spot us crossing that open ground, we'll be sitting ducks. Only if we cross during daylight, Mitchell replied. We wait for sunset, then make our move under cover of darkness. Rodriguez checked his watch. Sunset was still 4 hours away. We can't stay here that long. They'll find us. Mitchell smiled. Not a happy expression, but the cold smile of someone who had a plan. They'll find where we were, she corrected. By the time they get here, we'll be somewhere else. For the next 3 hours, Mitchell led Rodriguez through a complex series of movements that showcased her understanding of tactical evasion. She used terrain features to mask their movement, doubled back on their own trail to confuse trackers, and consistently chose routes that would force their pursuers to split up their search efforts. Rodriguez found himself developing a deep appreciation for Mitchell's tactical expertise. She didn't just move through the terrain. She used it as a weapon, turning their pursuers' advantages against them. Every decision she made seemed designed to complicate the enemy's search while improving their own position. There, Mitchell whispered, pointing to a narrow cave opening barely visible behind a cluster of rocks. We wait there until dark. The cave was small and uncomfortable, but it provided complete concealment and a clear view of the approaches to their position. More importantly, it was positioned so that they could monitor their pursuers' movements without exposing themselves. As they settled into their hiding spot, Rodriguez noticed that Mitchell immediately began preparing for their final push to the extraction point. She checked her equipment, studied maps of the area, and planned multiple contingency routes in case their primary plan failed. You've done this before, Rodriguez observed. Not exactly this, Mitchell replied, but similar situations. The principles are always the same. Stay calm, think ahead, use every advantage you can find. Through the cave opening, they could see Taliban fighters working their way up the mountainside below them. The searchers were being thorough, but Rodriguez could see that Mitchell's route selection had forced them to cover far more ground than they had anticipated. They're getting frustrated, Rodriguez noted, watching the searchers' increasingly erratic movements. Good, Mitchell said. Frustrated people make mistakes. As the afternoon wore on, Rodriguez found himself studying Mitchell's behavior during their enforced wait. While he felt the natural tension of being hunted, Mitchell seemed almost relaxed. She maintained constant awareness of their surroundings, but without the nervous energy that would have consumed most people in their situation. How do you stay so calm? Rodriguez asked finally. Mitchell considered the question for a moment. My father used to say that stress is just your body preparing you to act. The key is channeling that energy into useful activity instead of wasting it on worry. As sunset approached, Mitchell began making final preparations for their movement. She applied fresh camouflage paint to her face, secured all equipment to prevent noise, and reviewed their route one more time. Remember, she said as they prepared to leave their hiding spot, slow and steady. We have all night to reach the extraction point, so there's no need to rush. The final phase of their escape proved to be the most challenging yet. Moving through mountainous terrain in complete darkness required extraordinary care and skill. One misstep could result in a deadly fall, while any noise could alert their pursuers to their location. Mitchell moved through the darkness like she had been born to it. She seemed to have an intuitive understanding of the terrain, finding safe footing even when Rodriguez couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Her ability to navigate in such conditions was remarkable, suggesting extensive training in night operations. How can you see where you're going? Rodriguez whispered during one of their brief rest stops. I'm not seeing, Mitchell replied. I'm feeling. The ground tells you everything you need to know if you pay attention to it. Rodriguez tried to understand what she meant and gradually began to notice subtle differences in the terrain under his feet. Solid rock felt different from loose gravel, which felt different from packed earth. Mitchell was reading the landscape through her feet, using senses that most people ignored. They reached the ridgeline that overlooked Extraction Point Charlie just as the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon. Through his binoculars, Rodriguez could see their extraction team already in position, waiting for their signal. Beautiful sight, Rodriguez commented, feeling genuine relief for the first time since their mission began. Mitchell raised her radio to call for pickup, but before she could transmit, Rodriguez noticed movement on a ridgeline to their east. Contact, he whispered urgently. Looks like our friends found another route. Through his scope, Rodriguez could see Taliban fighters moving toward a position that would give them clear fields of fire over the extraction landing zone. If those fighters reached their destination, the extraction helicopter would be flying into a deadly ambush. Mitchell studied the situation through her own optics, immediately understanding the problem. Range to hostile position? Rodriguez made quick calculations. 800 meters, give or take. Without hesitation, Mitchell began setting up her rifle for another shot. Rodriguez realized that she was preparing to engage targets that posed a threat to their extraction, even though doing so would reveal their position to any other hostile forces in the area. "You don't have to do this," Rodriguez said. "We could call for abort and try again tomorrow." Mitchell looked at him with an expression that made Rodriguez understand exactly why she had volunteered for this mission in the first place. "I don't leave Marines behind," she said simply. "And I don't let good Marines die because I was too scared to take a shot." As Mitchell settled into her shooting position for what would be her third engagement of the mission, Rodriguez realized that he was witnessing something extraordinary. This wasn't just exceptional marksmanship or tactical skill. This was the kind of courage and dedication that defined the very best Marines. Mitchell's third shot of the mission came at dawn, silhouetted against the rising sun that painted the Afghan mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The hostile fighters moving to ambush their extraction helicopter never had a chance to complete their mission. Mitchell's bullet found its target with the same deadly precision she had demonstrated throughout their operation. Eliminating the threat before it could materialize, "Target down," Rodriguez confirmed through his spotting scope. "Extraction zone is clear." Mitchell was already breaking down her position, moving with the efficiency that had characterized every aspect of their mission. But as she prepared to signal for pickup, Rodriguez noticed something that made him pause. Mitchell's hands, which had been rock steady throughout hours of life and death stress, were trembling slightly as she secured her rifle. "You okay?" Rodriguez asked quietly. Mitchell looked at him with surprise, as if she hadn't realized her body was finally releasing the tension she had carried throughout their mission. "Just adrenaline," she said, flexing her fingers to restore steady control. "It always hits after the action stops." Rodriguez found this admission somehow reassuring. For hours, Mitchell had seemed almost superhuman in her composure and capability. Seeing this small sign of normal human reaction made her achievement seem even more remarkable, not less. The extraction helicopter arrived within minutes of Mitchell's signal, its crew clearly relieved to find both Marines alive and uninjured. As they lifted off from the landing zone, Rodriguez looked down at the mountainous terrain they had crossed during their escape and marveled at what they had accomplished. During the flight back to Camp Leatherneck, Rodriguez found himself reviewing the events of their mission with growing amazement. Mitchell had not only completed one of the most difficult shots he had ever witnessed, but had done so 3 times under increasingly challenging circumstances. More importantly, her tactical decision-making and leadership during their extraction had been flawless. When they landed at the base, Rodriguez expected a routine debriefing and mission completion report. What he found instead was a crowd of Marines waiting for their return. Word of their successful mission had apparently spread throughout the camp, and their fellow Marines wanted to hear the details firsthand. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes was among the waiting group, his expression showing both relief and curiosity. "Mission success?" he asked as Mitchell and Rodriguez approached. "Target eliminated, sir," Mitchell reported with characteristic brevity. "No friendly casualties." Hayes nodded, but Rodriguez could see that the colonel wanted more details than Mitchell's minimalist report provided. "I understand there were complications during extraction?" "Nothing we couldn't handle, sir," Mitchell replied. Rodriguez realized that Mitchell wasn't going to elaborate on the extraordinary actions she had taken during their mission. Her modesty was admirable, but Rodriguez felt that her performance deserved recognition. "Sir," Rodriguez interrupted, "Staff Sergeant Mitchell eliminated 3 separate targets during our mission. The additional engagements prevented hostile forces from compromising our extraction and potentially threatening our support elements." Hayes raised his eyebrows, clearly impressed. 3 targets? At what ranges?" "Over 1,000 meters for each engagement, sir," Rodriguez continued. "Under combat conditions with limited support while being actively pursued by hostile forces." A murmur of amazement rippled through the gathered Marines. Even by special operations standards, Mitchell's performance was exceptional. Hayes studied Mitchell with new respect, clearly reassessing his evaluation of her capabilities. "Outstanding work, Staff Sergeant," Hayes said formally. "Both of you. Full debrief in 1 hour." As the crowd began to disperse, Rodriguez found himself walking alongside Mitchell toward the debriefing room. But their progress was interrupted by Corporal Thompson, who approached with an expression that mixed respect and something approaching awe. "Staff Sergeant," Thompson said, his earlier skepticism completely gone. "That was some incredible shooting. I mean, 3 targets at over 1,000 meters under those conditions. I've never heard of anything like it." Mitchell acknowledged the praise with a simple nod, but Rodriguez could see that she was uncomfortable with the attention. "Just doing my job, Corporal. Just doing your job?" Thompson shook his head in amazement. "Ma'am, what you did out there? That wasn't just doing your job. That was something else entirely." Thompson paused as if searching for the right words to express what he was thinking. "You know what you reminded me of out there? A black mamba. Silent, deadly, striking without warning. 1 shot, 1 kill every time." Rodriguez saw Mitchell's expression change slightly at Thompson's words. Something about the comparison seemed to resonate with her, though she didn't respond immediately. "Black Mamba," Thompson repeated, warming to his theme. "That's what we should call you. I mean, that's exactly what you were out there. A predator that strikes fast and never misses." Other Marines who had gathered around to hear about the mission began nodding in agreement. Rodriguez could see that Thompson's suggested call sign was gaining immediate acceptance among their unit. In the military culture where call signs were badges of honor earned through exceptional performance, Black Mamba seemed to capture something essential about Mitchell's capabilities. "What do you think, Staff Sergeant?" Sergeant Williams asked. "Does Black Mamba fit?" Mitchell considered the question for a moment, and Rodriguez could see her weighing not just the call sign itself, but what accepting it would mean. Call signs in the military were more than nicknames. They were markers of identity and achievement that followed Marines throughout their careers. "I suppose there are worse things to be called," Mitchell said finally, and Rodriguez caught the hint of a smile in her voice. From that moment, the name stuck. Within hours, word of Black Mamba's mission had spread throughout Camp Leatherneck and beyond. The story grew in the telling, as military stories often do. But the core facts remained undeniable. Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell had accomplished something extraordinary. Over the following weeks, Rodriguez watched as Mitchell's reputation continued to grow. Other units began requesting her support for their operations. Intelligence officers sought her input on mission planning. Even Marines from other branches of service wanted to meet the legendary Black Mamba. But Rodriguez noticed that despite her growing fame, Mitchell remained fundamentally unchanged. She continued to approach each mission with the same methodical professionalism, the same quiet confidence, and the same unwavering commitment to protecting her fellow Marines. "Do you regret it?" Rodriguez asked her one evening as they sat watching the sunset over the Afghan mountains. "Becoming famous, I mean. Having a reputation to live up to." Mitchell considered the question for a long moment. "My father once told me that reputation is just other people's opinions about what you've already done. What matters is what you do next." Rodriguez nodded, understanding that Mitchell's focus remained exactly where it had always been, on the mission, on her Marines, and on the job that needed to be done. Years later, when Rodriguez would tell the story of how Black Mamba earned her call sign, he would always emphasize that the nickname captured only part of who Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell really was. Yes, she was a deadly sniper with extraordinary skills, but more importantly, she was a Marine who embodied everything the Corps stood for: courage, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to protecting her fellow Marines, no matter the cost. The joke about her call sign that Thompson had initially made would never come. Faced with Mitchell's extraordinary performance and unwavering professionalism, even his natural tendency toward humor was overwhelmed by genuine respect and admiration. Black Mamba had not just earned her call sign through exceptional marksmanship, she had earned the kind of respect that would follow her throughout her military career and beyond.